this bill and get on to the next generation of jobs. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
Senator from Connecticut is recognized.
Thank you. I ask to speak as if in morning business.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. President. First, let me thank my distinguished colleague from Michigan for her extraordinary leadership on a milestone bill, and I am so proud to be supporting this bill and to be in this chamber speaking with her on issues that really affect every American, not just those who may have farmers or may be recognized as farm states, but the kind of leadership that has just been heard, I think, is a model for all of us, and I thank her. I want to talk today about two issues that directly affect the health and safety of Americans of all ages, but particularly our seniors, and begin by associating myself with the remarks made earlier by Senators Whitehouse and Boxer with respect to Senate Resolution 37. I strongly oppose efforts underway to roll back Clean Air Act provisions that are critical to the health and safety and well-being of every man, woman, and child in this country. Last December, the EPA finalized a rule aimed at reducing mercury and other toxic emissions from electric generating units by about 90%. This rule affects the most toxic emissions in the United States: mercury, acid gas, nickel, selenium, cyanide. These rules are more important than ever. The effort to roll them back should be resisted and rejected. And I hope that my colleagues will join with me in opposing the joint Senate resolution that would not only stymie but stop efforts to protect Americans against the most toxic emissions. I fought for these kinds of protections as Attorney General. In fact, took action as Attorney General to compel these kinds of rules, and I believe that the EPA is acting responsibly now in promulgating them. I want to thank my colleagues on behalf of myself and Senator Kirk for approving yesterday a resolution designating tomorrow, June 15th, as World Elder Abuse Awareness Day. The resolution that Senator Kirk and I offered and that this body passed recognizes the scourge that elder abuse represents here in America and around the world. I thank my colleagues for supporting it overwhelmingly, and I thank the President of the United States for proclaiming tomorrow, June 15th, as World Elder Abuse Awareness Day, and to Secretary Sebelius for announcing today that $5.5 million in funding for states and tribes will be available to test ways to prevent elder abuse, neglect, and exploitation. This initiative helps to implement the Elder Justice Act, which was enacted as part of the Affordable Care Act. And I believe that this kind of initiative brings together in partnership local, state, federal authorities and private groups to combat this epidemic. It is a spreading epidemic of abuse of elders. We have statistics that indicate how it is, in fact, spreading. Elder abuse incidents have increased by 150% in the last 10 years alone. A recent study of the GAO shows that every year 14% of all non-institutionalized adults are victims of abuse or neglect or exploitation, whether physical or financial or even sexual. So the statistics show a trend that is undeniable, not only in the 2 million adults who are maltreated every year, but in the $2.9 billion taken from older adults each year as a result of financial abuse and exploitation. $2.9 billion every year taken from older Americans. But the statistics tell only a fraction of the story, because the fact is that only one out of every 44 incidents of financial abuse is reported. 43 out of 44 incidents are unreported. And in fact, of all incidents of abuse, 22 out of 23 are unreported. And the reasons are diverse. They may be shame, embarrassment. In fact, one of the most common reasons for underreporting is that the victim is related to the perpetrator. Sadly, shamefully, tragically, all too many victims of elder abuse suffer at the hands of relatives. It may be a daughter or son, it may be a brother or sister, and all too often they are victims at the hands of caregivers who are entrusted with their care, literally in positions of trust for people who may suffer physically from debilitating illnesses or from dementia or other kinds of afflictions. And so this population is among our most vulnerable, and we must take stronger steps to protect them. As Attorney General, I sought to lead such efforts. And in fact, Connecticut now has stronger measures against elder abuse, such as more thorough background checks as a result of these initiatives. As a member of the Committee on Aging, I held a hearing in Hartford very recently to document this spreading epidemic and the way it affects all of us, all of our relatives, all of our friends. It cuts across all lines of geography, race, gender, even income group. And so this epidemic must be stopped. And that is why this resolution is important in calling attention to the problem. The President's proclamation enhances awareness, and I thank my colleagues for their continued effort and their involvement in this cause. What's required at the end of the day is more resources. More resources for law enforcement authorities that have such a critical role in protecting those who suffer from it and deterring those who would commit it. And partnerships among state, local, and federal authorities. Those partnerships must seek out and encourage greater reporting so that efforts can be taken to stop and deter it. I will continue this battle. I thank my colleagues for joining me and for approving this resolution and for demonstrating that we care. We care as a body and as an institution. It is not a Republican or a Democratic issue. It is truly bipartisan because this generation has worked hard, accumulated savings, counted on security, and is depending on us, trusting us for their safety. And we know that the number in this age group will only grow, in fact double, within the next years. And that is why we must address it, and I thank again my colleagues for doing so. Thank you, Mr. President, and I yield the floor. I note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Senators continuing to work on a 5-year farm bill proposal covering a number of policies and programs. Work continues behind the scenes on an agreement on amendments as we hear senators address items and possible amendments to the bill. Also, coming up shortly, the Senate will hold a procedural vote on an ambassador nomination, Maria Carmen Aponte, to be ambassador to El Salvador. That vote is set for 12:30 Eastern. Farm bill debate could last for several more days, and again, still no agreement on amendments to that bill. The House is not in session this week. Members are in recess for a district work period. Legislative work will continue Monday at 2 p.m. Eastern. So with the House out this week, it gives us a chance to show you some other congressional and public affairs-related programming on C-SPAN. Earlier, we showed you a hearing on Medicare payments to physicians being held by the Senate Finance Committee. If you missed any of that, you can see it on our, actually you can see it in the C-SPAN video library at cspan.org. On C-SPAN 3 right now, a Senate Foreign Relations Committee hearing on the Law of the Sea Treaty. It's a United Nations treaty that governs international waterways. The U.S. is the only major country that hasn't ratified that treaty. 2 panels today. One started at 10 o'clock this morning, giving a military perspective on the agreement. That's expected to go until 1 o'clock. The second panel will get underway at 2:30 with perspectives from former government officials, and among the witnesses, former Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld and former Deputy Secretary of State John Negroponte. That will be on C-SPAN this afternoon, again starting at 2:30 this afternoon. And at 12:30 today, the Faith and Freedom Coalition kicks off its 2012 conference. You'll hear from Senators Rob Portman, Jim DeMint, and Marco Rubio. That will be live on C-SPAN starting at 12:30.
Senator from New Jersey is recognized.
Mr. President, what is the order before the business before the Senate?
We're in a quorum call.
I ask that the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection, so ordered. Under the previous order, the Senate will proceed to executive session. The motion to proceed to the motion to reconsider the vote by which cloture was not invoked on executive calendar number 501 is agreed to. The motion to reconsider is agreed to, or there will now be 30 minutes of debate, equally divided in the usual form.
Mr. President.
Senator from New Jersey.
Mr. President, I've come to the floor to address and advocate for the nomination of an extraordinary woman, a qualified, talented Latina, Maria Carmen Aponte, to be the United States ambassador to El Salvador. Over 2 years ago, I first chaired the nomination hearing for Ambassador Aponte to serve as President Obama's ambassador to El Salvador, to San Salvador. The reality is as a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, I found her to be an exceptional candidate. Last November, I chaired yet another hearing for Ambassador Aponte. Then last December, this chamber met to vote on her confirmation. In addition to last year's vote, the Foreign Relations Committee has held a series of meetings to consider her nomination, and frankly, I have not seen any nominee forced to go through such an arduous and drawn-out confirmation process as Ms. Aponte. Let me talk about her record. Maria Carmen Aponte is a respected American diplomat who had been on the job and served this nation with distinction. During the 15 months that Ambassador Aponte was sworn in as the U.S. ambassador to El Salvador, she impressed the diplomatic establishment with her professionalism and won the respect of parties both on the right and the left in El Salvador. She has won the respect of civilian and military forces. She's won the respect of the public and private sectors. She has won everyone's support and fostered a strong U.S.-Salvadorian bilateral relationship that culminated with President Obama announcing El Salvador as one of only 4 countries in the world and the only country in Latin America chosen to participate in the Partnership for Growth initiative. Most importantly, Ambassador Aponte has been an advocate for American national security and democratic values. Ambassador Aponte, as a result of her advocacy, El Salvador is again a key ally in Central America. Its troops were the only ones from a Latin American country fighting alongside American troops in both Iraq and Afghanistan. And as a result of her negotiating skills, the United States and El Salvador will open a new jointly funded electronic monitoring center that will be an invaluable tool in fighting transnational crime. Before that period of time in which he had a recess appointment, Ambassador Aponte had been the executive director of the Puerto Rican Federal Affairs Administration in 2001. She had served as a director at the National Council of La Raza, the Puerto Rican Legal Defense and Education Fund. She presided over the Hispanic Bar Association of the District of Columbia and the Hispanic National Bar Association. Mr. President, this is a record of success. It's a record of honor. It's a record of diplomatic and political distinction. It's a record of a dedicated, qualified, experienced, and engaged American diplomat, a 15-month record that brought our nations together. What more could we ask? What more should we ask? Finally, I will simply say that the statements that have been used by some against Ambassador Aponte, I believe, are baseless. As someone who personally reviewed her record, as someone who personally looked at all of the files, I believe there is absolutely nothing to prevent Ambassador Aponte by being confirmed by the Senate. And it is my hope, with having had the whole history of her tremendous service and all the issues vetted, that today the Senate will take a vote that will confirm an incredibly qualified person who has a long history of tremendous service to the Hispanic community in this country, to our nation, and who did an exceptional job in the 15 months that she was appointed by President Obama during a recess appointment as the ambassador to El Salvador. She served the national interest and security of the United States very well, and we have had an incredible period of time in which we've had no ambassador confirmed there. That sends the wrong message to a country that is willing to embrace its relationship with the United States in Central America in the midst of other countries that are not as friendly to the United States. We need to confirm an ambassador, send her there, have her continue the work she was doing. With that, Madam President, I'd ask unanimous consent that any time in which there is a quorum call be equally divided against both sides.
Without objection.
And with that, Madam President, I observe the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Madam President,
The senator from New Jersey,
I ask quorum call be vitiated,
without objection.
and I ask unanimous consent to speak in what remaining time there is.
Without objection.
Madam President, we're about to vote on what I hope will be a positive vote to send a message to the people of El Salvador that we appreciate their positive engagement with the United States at a time in which many Central and Latin American countries have taken a different view. This is a country that has engaged with us on the whole issue of narcotics trafficking, has sent their sons and daughters to fight alongside with us, and have shown a willingness to engage in democracy and rule of law. We have an incredibly qualified American of Latina descent, Mari Carmen Aponte. She is someone who served with distinction for 15 months. I would assume that the absence of voices to the contrary in the chamber up to this time speak volumes of the process we've had and the opportunity that we are about to engage in. So it is my hope that we will see a strong bipartisan vote on behalf of Ambassador Aponte, send her back to El Salvador, getting back to work for the United States and our collective interests. And with that, Madam President, I yield the floor. And with that, I observe the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
President,
The senator from New Jersey,
ask quorum call be vitiated.
without objection. All time has expired. Under the previous order, the clerk will report the motion to invoke cloture.
Cloture motion. We, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, hereby move to bring to a close the debate on the nomination of Marie Carmen Aponte of the District of Columbia to be Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of the United States of America to the Republic of El Salvador, signed by 17 senators.
By unanimous consent, the mandatory quorum call has been waived. The question is, upon reconsideration, is it the sense of the Senate that debate on the nomination of Marie Carmen Aponte of the District of Columbia to be Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of the United States of America to the Republic of El Salvador shall be brought to a close? The yeas and nays are mandatory under the rule. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka, Mr. Alexander, Ms. Ayotte, Mr. Barrasso, Mr. Baucus, Mr. Begich, Mr. Bennett, Mr. Bingaman. Mr. Blunt. Mr. Blumenthal. Mr. Blunt. Mr. Bozeman. Mrs. Boxer. Mr. Brown of Massachusetts. Mr. Brown of Ohio. Mr. Burr. Ms. Cantwell. Mr. Cardin. Mr. Carper. Mr. Casey. Mr. Chambliss. Mr. Coates. Mr. Coburn. Mr. Cochran. Ms. Collins. Mr. Conrad. Mr. Coons. Mr. Corker. Mr. Cornyn, Mr. Crapo, Mr. Dement, Mr. Durbin, Mr. Enzi, Mrs. Feinstein, Mr. Franken, Mrs. Gillibrand, Mr. Graham, Mr. Grassley, Mrs. Hagan, Mr. Harkin, Mr. Hatch, Mr. Heller, Mr. Hoven, Mrs. Hutchison, Mr. Inhofe, Mr. Inouye, thanks. Mr. Inouye, Mr. Isaacson, Mr. Johans, Mr. Johnson of Wisconsin, Mr. Johnson of South Dakota, Mr. Kerry, Mr. Kirk, Mr. Cole, Mr. Kyle, Ms. Landrieu, Mr. Lautenberg, Mr. Leahy, Mr. Lee, Mr. Levin, Mr. Lieberman, Mr. Lugar, Mr. Manchin, Sir. Mr. McCain, Mrs. McCaskill, Mr. McConnell, Mr. Menendez, Mr. Merkley, Ms. Mikulski, Mr. Moran, Ms. Murkowski, Mrs. Murray, Mr. Nelson of Nebraska, Mr. Nelson of Florida, Mr. Paul, Mr. Portman, Mr. Pryor, Mr. Reed of Rhode Island, Mr. Reed of Nevada, Mr. Risch, Mr. Roberts, Mr. Rockefeller, Mr. Rubio, Mr. Sanders, Mr. Schumer, Mr. Sessions, Mrs. Shaheen, Mr. Shelby, Ms. Snow, Ms. Stabenow, Mr. Tester, Mr. Thune, Mr. Toomey, Mr. Udall of Colorado, Mr. Udall of New Mexico, Mr. Vitter, Mr. Warner, Mr. Webb, Mr. Whitehouse, Mr. Wicker, Mr. Wyden. Ms. Ayotte. Ms. Ayotte. Aye. Mr. Portman. Mr. Portman, no. Mr. Leahy. Mr. Leahy, aye. Mrs. Hagan. Mrs. Hagan, aye. Senators voting in the affirmative: Ayotte, Bingaman, Brown of Ohio, Carper, Hagan, Leahy, Menendez, Rockefeller, Rubio, Tester, and Whitehouse. Senators voting in the negative: Blunt, Chambliss, Grassley, Hatch, Isaacson, Kyle, Portman, and Vitter. Mr. Roberts, no. Mr. Johnson of South Dakota, aye. Mrs. Murray, aye. Ms. Mikulski. Ms. Mikulski, aye. Mr. Inhofe. Mr. Inhofe, no. Mr. Johans. Mr. Johans, no. Mr. Reed of Nevada. Mr. Reed of Nevada, aye. Ms. Collins, aye. Mr. Coons. Mr. Coons, aye. Manchin. Mr. Manchin, aye. Ms. Stabenow, aye. Mr. Dement. Mr. Dement, no. Mr. Conrad. Mr. Conrad, aye. Mr. Brown of Massachusetts, aye. Mr. Coburn, no. Mr. Schumer. Mr. Schumer, aye. Mr. Graham. Mr. Graham, aye. Mr. Reed. Mr. Reed of Rhode Island, aye. Mr. McConnell. Mr. McConnell, no. Mr. Cochran. Mr. Cochran, no. Mr. Lugar. Mr. Lugar, aye. Mr. Pryor. Mr. Pryor, aye. Mr. Bennett. Mr. Bennett, aye. Mr. Baucus. Mr. Baucus, aye. Mr. Sanders. Mr. Sanders, aye. Mr. Nelson. Mr. Nelson of Nebraska, aye. Mr. Cardin. Mr. Cardin, aye. Mr. Burr. Mr. Burr, no. Mrs. McCaskill. Mrs. McCaskill, aye. Webb. Mr. Webb, aye. Mr. Begich. Mr. Begich, aye. Mr. Franken. Mr. Franken, aye. Mr. Crapo. Mr. Crapo, no. Mr. Wyden. Mr. Wyden, aye. Mr. Durbin. Mr. Durbin, aye. Mr. Harkin. Mr. Harkin, aye. Mr. Alexander. Mr. Alexander, no. Mr. Shelby. Mr. Shelby, no. Mr. Toomey. Mr. Toomey, no. Mr. Bozeman. Mr. Bozeman, no. Mr. Moran.
No.
Mr. Moran, no. Mr. Inouye. Mr. Inouye, aye. Mrs. Feinstein. Mrs. Feinstein, aye. Mr. Udall. Mr. Udall of Colorado, aye. Mr. Paul. Mr. Paul, no. Mr. Corker. Mr. Corker, no. Ms. Cantwell, aye. Mr. Akaka. Mr. Akaka, aye. Mr. Cole. Mr. Cole, aye. Mr. McCain. Mr. McCain, aye. Mr. Lieberman. Mr. Lieberman, aye. Mr. Nelson. Mr. Nelson of Florida, aye. Mrs. Gillibrand. Mrs. Gillibrand, aye. Mr. Levin. Mr. Levin, aye. Mr. Udall. Mr. Udall of New Mexico, aye. Mr. Cornyn. Mr. Cornyn, no. Mr. Risch. Mr. Risch, no. Mr. Casey. Mr. Casey, aye. Mr. Johnson. Mr. Johnson of Wisconsin, no. Mr. Enzi. Mr. Enzi, no. Ms. Snow. Ms. Snow, aye. Mr. Coates. Mr. Coates, no. Mr. Lee. Mr. Lee, no. Ms. Landrieu. Ms. Landrieu, aye. Mr. Heller. Mr. Heller, no. Mr. Merkley. Mr. Merkley, aye. Ms. Klobuchar. Ms. Klobuchar, aye. Mr. Warner. Mr. Warner, aye.
Amen.
Ms. Murkowski. Ms. Murkowski, aye. Mr. Sessions. Mr. Sessions, no. Mr. Barrasso. Mr. Barrasso, no. Mrs. Boxer. Mrs. Boxer, aye. Mr. Carey. Mr. Carey, aye. Mr. Blumenthal. Mr. Blumenthal, aye. Mr. Hoeven, no. Mrs. Shaheen. Mrs. Shaheen, aye. Mr. Lautenberg. Mr. Lautenberg, aye. Mr. Wicker. Mr. Wicker, no. Mr. Thune. Mr. Thune, no. Mrs. Hutchison. Mrs. Hutchison, no.
Are there any senators in the chamber wishing to vote or wishing to change their vote?
Are there any senators in the chamber wishing to vote or to change their vote? Seeing none, on this vote, the yeas are 62, the nays are 37. 3/5 of the senators duly chosen and sworn having voted in the affirmative, the motion upon reconsideration is agreed to.
Madam President,
The majority leader.
I ask that the remarks I am going to give in just a minute appear prior to the vote having